Welcome to Quit Building Mature. Hope you're having a great Saturday. As I do on Saturdays, I want to look at one of the books of the Bible because we're doing an overview look of each book, and today will be in the book of Isaiah. So the first question we ask is, who wrote the document? Well, the book of Isaiah gets its name obviously from its writer, and this is true of most of the books of the prophets. Now, Isaiah was married to a prophetess, and they had at least two sons. We see this in Isaiah chapter 7, verse 3, and Isaiah chapter 8, verse 3. Now, Isaiah prophesied during the reign of four Judean kings. It was Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah. We see this in chapter 1 and verse 1. Now, Isaiah probably died during the rule of the evil king Manasseh. Now, Christian writings from the 2nd century recognized Isaiah as one of the prophets whose death was described in Hebrews 11:37. He was the prophet who was sawn in two. Now, there are two implications that Isaiah probably lived in Jerusalem. First, the book shows his great concern for that city in chapter 1 of Isaiah, verse 1. And secondly, Isaiah lived, or at least the writer lived, close to at least two significant kings during the period of his prophecy. We see this in chapter 7, verse 3, and chapter 38, verse 1. Now, most biblical scholars in the last 200 years, they denied predictive prophecy. And that is why most of them think the book of Isaiah was written by several writers. Now, they divide the book of Isaiah into three sections: chapters 1 to 39, chapters 40 to 55, and chapters 56 to 66. So, denying predictive prophecy limits God's power to communicate with his people. But it also ignores the wide variety of specific predictive claims about Jesus that are scattered throughout the book of Isaiah. So what time in history did this take place? Well, Isaiah prophesied to a nation who no longer listened to God. And this was from 739 to 681 BC. So this nation no longer humbly served God. They no longer loved their neighbors. Judah offered meaningless sacrifices in God's temple at Jerusalem. They committed injustices everywhere, in every facet of their lives. So the people of Judah turned their backs on God. They alienated themselves from God. And that is exactly why God declared judgment through Isaiah on Judah. Now, the declarations were God's final plea for Judah to repent and to return to their covenant promises. God greatly hoped that they would return to him. So why is the book of Isaiah, written by the prophet Isaiah, so important for us? Well, out of the entire Old Testament, Isaiah provides the most complete prophetic picture of Jesus. It includes the full scope of his life. First, we find the announcement of his coming in Isaiah chapter 40, verses 3 to 5. We also read of his virgin birth in chapter 7, verse 14. We also read of his proclamation of the good news in Isaiah chapter 61, verse 1. It also tells us of Jesus' sacrificial death, or the Messiah's sacrificial death, chapter 52, verse 13, all the way up through chapter 53, verse 12. And it tells us of the Messiah's return to claim his own people, chapter 60, verses 2 and 3. So these prophecies and many other Jesus-focused texts that we discover in the book of Isaiah, they give evidence for great hope in a God who saves his people from their sin. So what is the big idea? What's the major emphasis of this prophecy, this book of Isaiah? Well, Isaiah's overall theme is clearly stated in chapter 12, verse 2. And this is how it reads. Behold, God is my salvation. I will trust and not be afraid. So this repeats the meaning of Isaiah's name. It means the salvation of Yahweh. So the primary theme is salvation. But there's also a strong emphasis on judgment that runs through chapters 1 through 39. So the two ideas of salvation and judgment, they coexist with a purpose. The presence of judgment indicates the great need for salvation. So before you and I can have salvation, before anyone can have salvation, we must have a need for it. If there's not a judgment against us, then we don't need salvation offered to us. And this is why the majority of the early chapters in the book of Isaiah, they describe God's judgments against Judah. They turned away from God. The essential principle to be learned is that those who persist in the rebellion will receive a judgment from God. But it also teaches that God is so very faithful to his promise. God preserved a small remnant of faithful believers. And God worked through that remnant to preserve the seed line in order for the Messiah to come through them as he promised. God will redeem those who live by faith. And God's plan has always been to prepare a place for those who live by faith. We see this in Isaiah chapter 65, verse 17, all the way through chapter 66, verse 24. So how do we apply this prophetic book of Isaiah to our lives? Well, Isaiah provides one of the clearest expressions of the gospel in all the Old Testament. From the first chapter, the people had clearly turned their backs on God. They failed in their covenant obligations to God. We see this in Isaiah chapter 1, verses 2 through 17. But despite that, despite their turning away from God, despite their not fulfilling their covenant obligations, God providentially held out hope to those hard-hearted, unrepentant people. He offered to cleanse their sins, and he offered to bless them if they once again would place their faith in him and totally, fully, heartfully obey him. We see this in chapter 1, verses 18 to 20. So salvation only comes from God. Only God can supply salvation to humanity. So the most important question is, will we accept what it is that God offers? See, Isaiah presents God's gospel message. Isaiah also clearly speaks about the sins of God's people. They were not merciful to others. So God saw their offerings, he saw their worship as hypocritical sacrifice. So is there anything in our lives that Isaiah would condemn as being wrong? Are we ever mean or disrespectful to our parents, to our children, to our family, to our friends, to strangers? See, the principles of Isaiah's message call us as Jesus' covenant disciples to be pure in our love for God and to be pure in our love for those that are in our sphere of influence. We read of this. Jesus is teaching Luke chapter 10, verses 26 to 28. Isaiah is an amazing document, and Isaiah the man was an amazing man of faith. Thanks for spending a few moments here with me today, guys. Hope this helps you to understand Isaiah a little bit. Have a great day. Thanks.